G'day, May 40 here. So Donald Trump offends a lot of people when he talks about America first because it seems so binary, seems so old-fashioned. Why do we have to talk about putting our own country first? Surely we should be putting philosophical principles first. Surely we should be putting virtue first. Surely we should be putting some universal ideas about freedom first. Surely we should put the good of all humanity first. Why would we put America first? It just seems so tribal, so nationalistic, so redolent of the worst parts of the late 1930s. And then later on in his speech, Donald Trump talked about the federal government will only recognize two genders, male and female. And that just strikes many people as hateful. Right? Why do you have to narrow things down to just male and female? Right? Why do you have to be that way, be so hateful, so reactionary, so narrow-minded, to just think in such binary terms? Why not become more sophisticated? Right? Why not recognize and celebrate the diversity of the world before us and all the different ways that people have to identify with their particular gender? So, Jews in the American Academy, 1900 to 1940, The Dynamics of Intellectual Assimilation. I like this book, reading it through for about the third or fourth time. And on the preface, page 14, it says, thinking in binary oppositions is a general feature of Western culture. Yeah, Western culture tends to think in binary terms. It is particularly indispensable in Jewish thought. So in the first chapter of Genesis, the world comes into being by God's creation of a series of opposites, which exclude but define each other. There is heaven and there is earth. There is light, there is darkness, there is land, there is water, and so on. So fundamental opposition in Judaism, however, was that between the transcendence of God and the immanence, the nearness of God. Right? There's complete separation of the two realms. Right? There's an absolute God, one and eternal. And this is what set Judaism apart from the surrounding pagan cultures that saw the divine suffused in nature. So from the perspective of Judaism, and I would assume Christianity and Islam, God is not in nature. God created nature. Now, God may use nature to reveal himself, but God and nature are not the same thing. Right? God is eternal. Nature is not eternal. So this position of Judaism, that God is not in nature, though God may make nature an instrument of his communication, meant an enormous gain in freedom for man, because one of its consequences is that man has sovereignty over nature. And so the idea that California would put the well-being of people behind the well-being of Delta Smelt is quite opposed to the perspective from the book of Genesis, as opposed from the biblical worldview that places man at the apex of creation. You think, oh, that's so binary. It's so hateful. 40, why are you being so hateful to the Delta Smelt? Are not the Delta Smelt just as valuable as you or me? And from some perspectives they are, but from a biblical, godly, Judeo-Christian, and I assume Islamic perspective, they are not of equal value to human being. So from the Jewish perspective, man is not subject to nature except in death. Right? Man should be independent of nature. He should prevail over nature. And this is completely different from the pagan perspective, which saw man as subject to the irrational whims of nature and of the gods. And from the Jewish perspective, God is not whimsical. So God operates for solid reasons. He just doesn't operate out of whim. So from the Jewish perspective, natural catastrophes such as drought, right, they can be interpreted as God's punishment for man failing to abide by the terms of the contract between man and God. So God can choose nature as a means of communication, but he is not part of nature. He is above nature. God's interaction with man is regulated by a contract, a covenant, a brit. And this contract is a central idea in Judaism. It declares in Genesis 1 and 2 that there is a separation of God's immanence, his nearness, and his transcendence. And at the same time, there is a connection to the two realms through the very words of the contract, the Torah. Right? The Torah takes from the heavens, it takes from God and brings it down to earth. So we can reach out to God, and God can reach out to us. So we have a contract with God in the Torah. God will keep out of immanence. That is, man will have sovereignty in this earth. Right? If man will only do certain things, if he will observe the Sabbath, for example, if he will maintain distinctions between male and female, human and animal, if he abstains from homosexual sex, if he sets up courts of law, if he does not worship idols publicly, if he does not go around denying God's existence, right? As long as man fulfills certain obligations, then God will stay out of this world and allow man sovereignty. So man gets to show he's obedient and that he will acknowledge God's invisible sovereignty through particular precise behavior. And this behavior will be largely about making binary distinctions. Now, the Torah and Jewish law becomes more and more complex. And so what you get in the elaboration of the Torah through the Talmud and the ongoing rabbinic tradition is we have all sorts of acts of daily life that are minutely prescribed to testify to God's existence. So it's the consuming of kosher versus non-kosher food. It's the way you measure time. So there's sacred time and non-sacred time. How you make love, all right? Do you have sex when the woman's on a period? No, you have to wait 7 days after her period, and you only have sex with your opposite-sex spouse, right? So the rhythms of life are a constant reenactment of this first separation between transcendence and immanence, all right? God up above and beyond human life, and immanence, God present, the holy and the profane, kosher, right? The laws of family purity, dietary laws, the laws of the Sabbath, laws of conjugal relations, they all depend upon binary oppositions. And they all reflect the fundamental separation between the transcendent God and what is immanent, and that is us, the people. And minute observance of these laws is a way of connecting the two. So God becomes represented in the collective acts of the Jewish people. Their actions express their covenant with God. And through this collective commitment, through this intense in-group identity, right, you have God's manifestation in history, and the people will call itself the Goy Kadosh, that is a holy people, meaning literally a separate people, separated from all the other peoples, the Goyim. And so as long as Jews preserve their separation from the other peoples of the world, this separation will also preserve the Jews. And so it's this obligation to recognize and to implement distinctions in all areas of life, to recognize the Jewish way of doing things versus the non-Jewish way of doing things. This has an enormous effect on the intellect of Jews. It is their intellectual grammar. It is a binary grid, and it sharpens the Jewish sense for intellectual games based on binary thinking. So you have Jews with a penchant for paradox, for dialectics, for a fortiori reasoning, and so forth. And one of the vexing problems in Judaism and outside of Judaism is the relationship between bondage and freedom. So life in traditional Judaism is tightly regulated, and group cohesion is so intense that individual freedom in the realm of action, in the possibility of self-realization, seems impossible. And yet the life of observance is supposed to set you free. It's supposed to grant you sovereignty. And it's a little bit like a 12-step program. So in Under Earners Anonymous, for example, one of the tools is to chart how you spend your time. Are you spending your time fulfilling your most important goals, or are you wasting your time? In Debtors Anonymous, you are asked to track every dollar you spend, every dollar you earn. So by carefully tracking your time, your spending, if you're in an eating program, tracking what you eat, this seems like bondage, right? You're under extreme regimentation. But for people with some disabling addiction in the realm of under-earning or debting or with regard to food, this regimentation is the beginning of freedom. When you track something, you will tend to have more of it. So the Trumpian inaugural address, right, it was quite redolent of major themes in the Hebrew Bible. Right, this is Mark Levine talking with Peter Schweizer, a terrific investigative journalist who's probably done more on the Biden crime family than anybody.
Quarters and nobody has done more to expose the Joe Biden crime family than Peter Schweizer over the years, with his writings, his books, his appearances, among other places here on this program. And Peter, there you watch as Joe Biden systematically undertakes the greatest cover-up, really, in governmental history. A senator, vice president, president, people used his office, his name, his position to make millions, to shake down foreign governments, even enemy foreign governments. And then he pardons his son, which effectively is pardoning him. And then you have these preemptive pardons of the immediate family. It must be fun at Thanksgiving. The next Thanksgiving, they're all going to stand there and, they'll sit around with the turkey and they'll thank God that Papa Bear pardoned all of them. What do you make of this? You, more than anybody else, should have a very fulsome view of this.
Yeah, Mark, I think that these pardons are the single most corrupt acts of any American president in U.S. history. And I don't say that lightly. I say that because what we're talking about is a level of corruption that involved tens of millions of dollars going to the Biden family, and what the sources of those funds are. This is not some, paving contractor back in a congressional district paying off a congressman. That's bad enough. These are foreign governments. These are foreign adversaries. And the problem is that the Bidens have now globalized corruption. They've created a situation where American politicians can effectively be bought off by our foreign adversaries. And that's what happened with the Clintons. That's what happened with the Bidens. The three countries were China, Russia, and Ukraine, all of which are highly corrupt, all of which who wanted something from Joe Biden as vice president and as president, and who got those things from this president. And you're quite right to point out that these pardons are of his family, but they are effectively a pardon of him. Because there is really no way to investigate or to prosecute Joe Biden for this influence peddling scheme if all the family members who he did it with are now let off the hook legally, which is what these pardons do.
It's not that he thinks Donald Trump will come after them. It's that he knows they're corrupt, isn't it? And haven't you written chapter and verse on this corruption, the millions of dollars that have flowed into the Biden crime family?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mark. I mean, look, let's look at the timeline. And we talked about this first. The first place when I published my book, I came on your show and we talked about this back in 2018, is the timing is clear. So in January of 2009, Joe Biden is sworn in as vice president of the United States. And literally 3 months later, Hunter Biden sets up an international financial firm and starts doing business, I'll put that in quotation marks, in the most corrupt places on the planet, China, Russia, and Ukraine. And the money starts to flow. And it's important to point out, by the way, Mark, that these pardons are very specific. They begin with any crimes that might have been committed from January 2014 going forward. And that is precisely the month when the money starts to flow from China, Russia, and Ukraine. They get tens of millions of dollars from Chinese entities that are close to the Chinese state, that are also linked to Chinese intelligence. In the spring of 2014 is when he agrees with Burisma, this Ukrainian energy company, corrupt energy company. He takes in millions from them. And this is the same time that Russian oligarch Yelena Baturina sends $3.5 million to Hunter Biden. Those things all happen at that period of time. So these are the deals that have taken place. Joe Biden was the point person on policy towards China. He was the point person under the Obama administration on Ukraine policy. And guess what? Both of those countries, people were sending the Bidens millions of dollars.
So he pardons his family members, preemptive pardon, abuses that power. There's simply no question about it. We've never seen anything like this before. He pardons his son after months and months of saying he would not pardon his son. He realizes that they're going to be on the hook if there's a serious investigation into the Biden crime family. But doesn't that also tell us another thing, Peter Schweizer? And I want you to address this as soon as we return, that he was very comfortable. He felt protected with Merrick Garland at the helm of the Department of Justice, with the U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C., with the head of the criminal division of the Department of Justice. He felt very comfortable that despite all the corruption and the graft and all the rest, that Department of Justice would never investigate him while he was president. But he did unleash it against his political opponent. And I want to get into that when we come back. The purpose of the special counsel is to investigate.
Okay, interesting essay in the New York Times that I was just reading about the era of hyperpolitics. So goodbye, the resistance. The era of hyperpolitics is over. Where has the anti-Trump energy gone? So remember, at this time in 2017, Trump was a crisis. You had, shortly after his inauguration in 2017, the Women's March, which brought about 500,000 people to Washington alone, made it the single largest day of mass protests in American history. Donald Trump was a crisis. Donald Trump was an obsession. Resistance to Donald Trump represented the high water mark for a certain kind of liberalism, one that was sincere and took over all of your life. It was totalizing, full of fury, thirsty for action. Almost every Democrat, from the ex-presidents to the junior staffers, had a blockbuster opinion on how Trump won. They all meted out blame, such as to the Russians. A few months into Trump's presidency, Al Green, a Democrat from Texas, called for his impeachment. Not a day went by when there wasn't some kind of mass march against Donald Trump or cause for fresh demonstrations. Twitter and Instagram were hothouses for anti-Trump activism. You had causes that sprang up quickly, standing up for immigrants or defending women or sustaining black lives. So this 2010s resistance to Trump, it was sprawling. It seemed irrepressible. It was a mass move that joined everyone from Bush Republicans to Bernie Sanders socialists. It was like nothing else in our modern era. And it seems even more remarkable in retrospect than it did at the time. Right? This was a period when there was serious debate over whether Donald Trump's press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, should even be served at a restaurant. And the movement in support of Donald Trump was equally fervent. Right? There were policies that attracted his supporters, such as nativism or protectionism or railing against elites. And Trump jettisoned the unpopular parts of the old Republican platform, such as slashing Social Security and waging new wars overseas. But much of his appeal is personal. To be MAGA is to inhabit an identity category. So ardently following Donald Trump meant caring about all his particular predilections and mounting a fight against the enemy wherever possible. So you had product boycotts, you had people on street corners, you had social media, NASCAR chants, school board meetings, election sites. It was an era of hyper politics. So between 2016 and 2021, politics engorged our public discourse. Right? You had all-encompassing, high-stakes political fights. People were looking to see the good, fight evil. You had the far right taking up its tiki torches or Antifa, roving the streets. You had culture turned into a perpetual tinderbox. Some of it was performance art. You had MAGA caps, you had pussy hats, and now everything seems different. The protests are muted. Few Democrats talk about impeachment. Few Democrats talk about incipient fascism, even with Elon Musk possibly gesticulating like a Nazi. What the heck was it that Elon Musk did on Inauguration Day?
So people are mad at this gesture. All this gesture means is Heil Hitler. This is all this gesture means. This is a gesture signifying your support for Hitler. Hitler was a politician in Germany in the 1940s. People had varying degrees of, some people really liked what he did. A lot of people were not into it. And that's fair. And I think when we look back on history, a lot of, now, you know what I mean? It's like things that happened then, like we'd never do now. And I think that's Hitler, that we run into that a little bit with Hitler, where it's like at the time, you know what I mean? It's like the word Oriental. It's a no-no now. But back then it wasn't, So I think this Hitler thing is just one of those things that, he's just heiling Hitler. And people seem really upset about that. I think they think that means something else. He's just saying, I like Hitler. That's not... He's not saying, I love everything Hitler did, or maybe he's not saying like, oh, Hitler was like let's go down the list of what he did. Oh, good. No, he's just saying overall, I happen to like Adolf Hitler and find that he did. So people that are upset about.
So I was thinking about God's immanence and God's transcendence today, and this beautiful young woman said to me, "You're looking sharp." And then I went back to thinking about God's immanence versus God's transcendence. Okay, back to the New York Times about the era of hyperpolitics is over. Democrats, liberals around me do not seem as anguished or as animated by this Trump restoration, right? They're not nearly as upset as they were in 2017. They're not howling about their party's future, right? The left is recalibrating. Some progressives say they're willing to work with Donald Trump if he embraces their policy arms. Centrists are willing to work with Donald Trump. All sorts of border policies that were decried as fascist in Trump's first term are gradually being embraced, or at least no longer resisted. The old discourse around the normalization of Donald Trump is dead. Businesses that once stood at a remove from Donald Trump, well, they giddily treat him as an ordinary president now, and they fund his inauguration. Republicans are still engrossed by Donald Trump, but even Republican politics feel more muted compared to the ascendance of the alt-right, compared to the days when Milo Yiannopoulos was preening for the cameras. The Republican coalition has expanded, but it's found it much harder to hold on to its spirit of righteous indignation and insurgency. Americans are still polarized, but the sense that the political was entirely personal, that performing politics was vital, that's fading, right? We cannot maintain the level of hysteria that we had during the first few years of Donald Trump, 2015 to 2021. We are leaving the era of hyperpolitics because all flames eventually burn out. We have some fires around Los Angeles right now, but any minute now we should get a rain and these fires will eventually go out. So in the early Trump years, the animation was moralistic, right? People were heroes and villains. The struggle against Trump was the struggle against fascism. There was great fear about what Donald Trump would do to the country, but the fear was mingled with a certain thrill, right? Those who were resisting Donald Trump felt like they were making history. Those who were supporting Donald Trump in the first term felt like they were making history. And people were just consumed with the political, not so much anymore. So fervor was the currency, moral clarity was the catchword, nuance was discarded. Right, against Donald Trump, this world historical menace. Who had time for nuance? By 2020, stopping Trump was the overriding theme of the election. And conservatives fully mobilized, too, on the cultural terrain. They're out there fighting over school curricula and library contents and bashing corporations that seem too liberal. And they would consume ivermectin as a form of political resistance. But these same pathologies have not taken over the 2024 election. Right, it's all over. That election, 2024 election, is over. And not many people on the left are genuinely shocked by Trump's win. Accommodation and acceptance of the new watchwords. There's a lot of talk about deal making. Hardly anyone is being tagged right now as a fascist collaborator for just musing about how to work with the Trump administration. We're not hearing about its complicity. You're lunching with Goebbels if you visit the White House. So this whole era of hyperpolitics, right, did not leave much behind that was durable. Its leaders have fallen out of public view. Right, this was no equivalent to the 1960s civil rights generation carrying the work forward. Black Lives Matter, the Women's March in 2025, these are not formidable political organizations. So all the drama surrounding the fight against fascism has faded. Now it just seems tired and alarmist to warn that Donald Trump will end free elections. The media and the elites used to attribute support to Donald Trump to racism, but you don't hear many people making that argument very strongly anymore because Trump, with each successive general election, has increased his vote share with non-white working-class voters. He's flipping majority Latino counties. He's attracting far more Asian voters. He's making inroads with black men, and he's having a lower share of the white population. The corporations and the politicians that once paid lip service to the values of Islam liberals, they now feel completely free to reverse course. Mark Zuckerberg went on Joe Rogan's show to express his desire for a corporate culture that celebrates masculinity and aggression. After the election, Massachusetts Democrat Seth Moulton reacted to the clash over trans rights, which the Trump campaign successfully exploited, by declaring he didn't want his daughters getting run over on a playing field by a male or a formerly male athlete. Right? The backlash he faced was nothing akin to what he would have encountered a few years before. The activist energy on the left has leaked away, and there is a remarkable lack of grandiose rancor between Trump and the Democrats. And you saw that most clearly on Friday evening, when Donald Trump sat around with Karen Bass, the mayor of Los Angeles, and Brad Sherman, a Democratic congressman, and they had a back and forth about what needed to be done to help Los Angeles recover. And Donald Trump was often remarkably frank, but the mayor of Los Angeles, she seemed rather muted. And even Brad Sherman seemed rather muted. And Ted Lieu, major Democrat politician in California, he just largely seemed to stay quiet. All right, let's get a little...
But we want you to be safe. We want you to be back in your homes immediately.
But the people are willing to clean out their own debris. It doesn't cost a lot.
Yes, and they can.
You should let them do it, because by the time you hire contractors, it's going to be 2 years.
If a family...
The people are willing to get a dumpster and do it themselves and clean it out.
And they can.
There's not that much left. It's all incinerated.
That's right.
And, you know, it's just going to take a long time if you do. You can do some of it, but a lot of these people, I know that guy right there that's talking. I know my people. You'll be on that thing tonight, throwing the stuff away, and your site it'll look perfect within 24 hours, and that's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to wait around for 7 months till the city hires some demolition contract that's going to charge him $25,000 to do his lot. Yeah. I think you have emergency powers just like I do, and I'm exercising my emergency powers. You have to exercise them also.
I did exercise them.
Because I looked. I mean, you have a very powerful emergency power, and you can do everything within 24 hours.
Yes. And if individuals want to clear out their property, they can. Well, yes, but you know that you will be able to go back soon.
Mr. President.
We think within a week.
That's a long time, a week. I'll be honest. To me, everyone's standing in front of their house. They want to go to work, and they're not allowed to do it.
And the most important thing is for people to be safe.
They're safe. They're safe. You know what? They're not safe. They're not safe now. They're going to be much safer. A week is actually a long time, the way I look at it. I watched hundreds of people standing in front of their lots, and they're not allowed to go in. It's all burned. It's gone. It's done. Nothing's going to happen to it. It's not going to burn anymore. There's nothing to burn. There's almost nothing to burn. And they want to go in. The people are all over the place. They're standing. And I say, why aren't you going in? We're trying to get a permit. And the permit's going to take them. Everybody said 18 months. You said 18 months. You said 18 months.
Last night.
And that was last night.
On that.
Okay, that was fun. Donald Trump seems to be quite enjoying himself. So let's have a look at the chat. Holly Rourke says, Luke, on TikTok, a lot of leftist Antifa types are organizing. There may be violence in the streets again. Keep your head on a swivel. Maybe their financing has been cut off. They lost the moral argument. Some of them are crazy as ever. They believe they're going to be heroes, and they still think that Trump is Hitler. I do hope the hyper-political age is over. This has been exhausting. Yes. So, according to this New York Times essay, what lies ahead is a cooling, characterized less by dejection than by sober realization that whatever was tried before simply did not work. It is challenging to maintain a perpetual state of alarm, right? It requires you to unnecessarily tense your shoulders. tense your neck, tense around your eyes and your lips. Right? It's exhausting to tell voters that every election might be the last one. The anti-Trump resistance on its own terms was a failure. Trump is here again. He's a popular vote champion. What comes next might be a more conventional politics. The resistance might be of a quieter type. We may not have nearly as much mass protests. So the cyclical nature of American politics promises that even Trump's moment in the sun will last only so long. If he stumbles, we may see more Democrats in Congress and an end to the GOP's ability to pass significant legislation. But what is not soon returning is the white-hot activism of the last decade. Politics will still be there, but it'll be largely static, just crackling in the background. It won't be everything anymore. And Mark Halperin nailed it on Friday afternoon.
It's tempting to cover Trump and just say he's doing great. He's getting the headlines he wants. He's enacting the policies he wants. He's never been more powerful with the Republican Party. The Democrats are completely discombobulated. But that's not the right way to cover him. It's important to say all that, but you also have to say, are his policies good? Now, you also have to say, is he fulfilling his campaign promises? A lot of what he's done this week that troubled the Democrats and the press are ripped from his campaign promises. Absolutely. And so I think it's fair to say, Democrats say, well, the voters voted for Trump, but they didn't vote for mass deportation. So the voters voted for Trump, but they didn't vote for getting rid of DEI. Like, you can't parse that. You can't know what was in the voters' minds. But you can say Trump won having espoused all these things. The other thing you can say is he's brought up some new stuff. I don't remember the Greenland thing being front and center or the Panama Canal thing being front and center. He's flipped all over the place on tariffs. And I told everybody that tariffs are a bluff. He does not want to put tariffs on. He wants to threaten people and get what he wants. But it's important to focus on the real lives of real people. And I think one mistake the Democrats continue to make, even though some of them are starting to be onto this, is they get distracted by stuff Trump says that makes them crazy and mental and distracted, like the press. And even on the real lives of real people. I think this is extraordinarily important, and it's sometimes referred to in the media, but not enough. Joe Biden was a failure on the economy, and a failure on the border, and a failure on foreign policy in most ways, and a failure on being on the right side of some social issues. You can say he passed some landmark legislation that laid the foundation to help the economy, but you cannot say that his economic record was a success, if only because of inflation. Okay? Again, I'm not saying everything he did was a disaster, but the judgment of the American people, and my judgment is, history's not going to say he was a great president on the economy during the time he was president. Okay? Part of why Trump is succeeding now is, it's just as it's very hard for Democrats, not impossible, but very hard, to say Trump is a liar and he covers things up. Well, Biden was a liar and covered things up, both related to his mental decline and Hunter. You can't say Trump is abusing the pardon power because Biden abused the pardon power. Now, it's a reasonable position. Many have said it. Biden's pardons were not as bad as Trump's. But there are plenty of people on the right who say, oh, yes, they were. You could say Trump showed tolerance for violence against law enforcement. And the Republicans will say Biden showed tolerance in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing. He showed tolerance towards violence against law enforcement. So it's not going to work for everyone, but for some in the media and for many Americans, including a lot of people who are not affiliated with either party, they're comparing Trump active, authentic, and getting attention and being present. They're comparing that to 4 years of Biden, and Trump's not coming out so horrible in the minds of many. But I'll say again, this platform and all my journalism, we cannot be cowed by how effective Trump is being right now and fail to look at what he's doing. Okay.
Okay, I want to get back to Peter Schweizer here talking about the Biden crime family.
Say a president within your own administration where you're the attorney general, and so you effectively recuse yourself or step back. That's why you appoint a special counsel. This attorney general, Garland, utterly corrupt, in my view. He unleashes a special counsel unconstitutionally against Donald Trump. Everything you've written in your book, chapter and verse, all the endnotes, providing documents showing financial movement of sums and so forth and so on. It seems to me that the Office of Public Integrity, that the Criminal Division, that the U.S. Attorney, that somebody in Washington, D.C. could have picked up your book and said, okay, we have no choice. We need a special prosecutor to investigate Biden. Yet Biden knew it wouldn't happen, and Biden uses the process against Donald Trump while he pretends he doesn't. What do you make of that?
No, I think you nailed it, Mark. Look, here's the thing. In the spring of 2018, I published Secret Empires. I came on this program. 3 months after that is when the investigation was launched into the Biden family by the FBI and also by the IRS. That investigation was launched. Those investigations went nowhere, and we know from the IRS whistleblowers that those investigations were squelched. And this is the problem that we have in Washington, D.C., at least with people that are part of the D.C. establishment, and that is that they protect each other. Look, we now know, looking back at the records, looking back at the emails, that Barack Obama knew what Joe Biden and his family were doing. He knew it was corrupt. We knew that John Kerry's son-in-law, Christopher Hines, said he was initially involved in some deals. He said, look, I don't want to get involved in these other deals. They're too corrupt. But nobody did anything about it. Nobody stopped it. And then, of course, when Joe Biden becomes president, that would be the classic case where you would have an independent counsel. This is an investigation of the president's own family. That's what the independent statute is about. So you have somebody detached from Main Justice who is investigating these things. And what does Merrick Garland do? He investigates his opponent. That would be Donald Trump. So it's a massive abuse of justice. And I think the important thing going forward, Mark, is, yes, these pardons have been issued. The status of criminal cases against the family certainly seem to be stopped. But we have got to get to the bottom of the cover-up and the abuse of power. This was not investigated. It was covered up by an apparatus in Washington, D.C. that involved at least dozens of senior people. And we have to get the truth out of exactly what happened. That means congressional investigations, and that means Pam Bondi at DOJ needs to investigate this further.
I agree 100% for the sake of the country. And so this kind of precedent isn't set. We can't have a Democrat Party that does this to Republicans, and a Republican Party that sits on its hands and feels self-righteous. Oh, we don't believe in recriminations. This isn't about recriminations. This is about getting our justice system back. What Donald Trump went through was unbelievably disgusting and, unimaginable when you really sit down and you think about all the things that happened to him. And then conversely, when you think about all the things Biden and his family have done with foreign governments enriching themselves, the FARA Act, the tax code, the gun purchase, all the rest of this stuff, utterly lawless, this family, and nothing. They pardon themselves effectively. He pardons them. Donald Trump, on the other hand, suffers through all of it. Final words.
Yeah, and the lying, Mark, the lying. Donald Trump, going back to the whole Russia collusion garbage, he's always been straightforward and clear. If he had meetings, if he discussed anything with anybody, he talked about it, he was open. The Bidens have lied. In 2018, I came on your show. They said there were no deals, there was nothing. We now know, of course, there was, and he had to pardon his family members to protect them.
Yes, and that January 6th committee, they need to be investigated too, each member by fellow members of Congress.
Hey, Drew Holden is in the political center. He's a pretty sharp critic of news media bias, typically towards left-wing causes.
Absolutely. We had a really fantastic piece on Tuesday, right after the inauguration, from Michael Lind, who's an intellectual titan on the right, that was a prebuttal of all of the concerns and complaints about deportations and Trump's plan for deportations. The narrative that, the lettuce is going to rot in the fields and we won't be able to sustain the U.S. economy, which is the sort of thing that the Wall Street Journal editorial board was promoting, that AEI was promoting, that a lot of other conservative interests were pushing out. And it just isn't true, right? One of the things that Lind did was he ticked through recent examples of crackdowns on immigration and said, what happened economically? Did the lettuce ever rot in the field? In Florida, they've started actually enforcing E-Verify. Is the lettuce rotting in the field there? And the answer is no, right? And those are the sort of important and valuable conversations that I don't think are being had in a quality way out there in the rest of the ecosystem.
Are you pro-Trump, anti-Trump, case by case?
I think we are irrespective in a way. What we're interested in is, again, fostering that debate and finding the best answers. There are going to be times where that lines up with Trump. There'll be plenty of times where it doesn't.
Okay, let's have a look at Drew Holden's Twitter page. So he's the managing editor of American Compass. He's pretty much in the political center. Lab leak started, lab leak going. So initially had the New York Times saying, Senator Tom Cotton repeats fringe theory of coronavirus origin. Scientists have dismissed suggestions the Chinese government was behind the outbreak. But it's the kind of tale that gains traction among those who see China as a threat. That's from 2020. Now, today, CIA now favors lab leak theory to explain COVID's origins. So do you remember how bad the media's COVID lab leak, the hypothesis that the virus came from a lab, how bad that coverage was? I thought I did. But it was a more dramatic example of uniform media malpractice than even I remembered. So it started in February 2020. Senator Tom Cotton suggested looking into the Chinese Communist Party lab studying bats near the initial cases in Wuhan. The media were outraged. In a since updated piece, Washington Post said the idea was a conspiracy theory that has been repeatedly debunked by the experts. I don't have a position on lab leak. I recognize that the experts, the virologists, say it was not, the COVID was not caused by a lab leak. All right, that's what virologists overwhelmingly say. It wasn't just the Washington Post. Shortly thereafter, the New York Times trotted out a similar allegation, calling the lab leak hypothesis a fringe theory and a tale designed to inflame social media. And CNN's Chris Cillizza said Tom Cotton was playing a dangerous game with his suggestions, with his coronavirus speculation. USA Today, in a since updated fact check, said that Tom Cotton's claims were false because overwhelming scientific evidence said so. Quick pause here to point something out. What the media were up in arms about wasn't the veracity of the lab leak idea, just that people thought it was plausible, that it may be true. Look how close the lab is to the first cases. This was the dawn of what I like to call experts say reporting, where an outlet finds someone with credentials who agrees with them to make the point that the outlet wants to make. So here's National Geographic, Forbes, CBS News, Washington Post, all doing that here. There are even more dramatic examples. Maybe my all-time favorite is from NPR, who, with the confidence that only that station possesses, claims that the lab leak theory had been debunked in April 2020. Scientists debunk lab accident theory of pandemic emergence. Here's ABC. Sorry, conspiracy theorists. Study concludes that COVID-19 is not a laboratory construct. It was a better time period for outlets using fact checkers as a political weapon with no connection to facts. This is CNN. The word of the year had to be debunked, which many outlets seem to believe meant we don't like this idea. So CNN was debunking lab leak along with the rest of the elite news media in 2020. It's impossible to ignore how this story intersects with Trump and his administration. Once he said he believed the lab leak idea, the press decided it must be a lie. Some rich headlines here from Business, Vice, CNN, Business Insider. It's the condescending tone here from Chris Hayes that gets me. Chris Hayes on right wing's escape from the lab theory of coronavirus origin. NPR is funded by your taxpayer dollars. As Trump pushes theory of virus origins, says NPR, some see parallels in lead up to Iraq war. Press at the time purported to be very upset that Trump was using the same language that they had used a few weeks before to describe the virus as Chinese. Yes, of course, Donald Trump is calling coronavirus the China virus for political reasons. And a few months earlier, CNN was saying a visual guide to the Wuhan coronavirus. Then a poll came out finding lots of people believed the lab leak theory, a third of Americans. The press leapt to tar the believers as rubes and people who convinced them as charlatans, right? This is CNN, Forbes, Vox, The Hill. In April 2020, Trump stopped U.S. funding to the lab in question in Wuhan. Till then, your tax dollars were paying for dubious research in an autocratic Chinese communist regime that maybe started a worldwide plague, and naturally the media applauded that move? Wrong. The press were incensed that Trump would stop giving your tax dollars to a shady lab in China. CBS News said it was jeopardizing a COVID cure. New York Times said the same thing. ABC blamed the bad move on conspiracy theories. As Vanity Fair pointed out, right-wing disinformation. The press elevated China's claims to stick it to Trump. Look at how the New York Times, CNN, and Time put the U.S. and China on equal believability footings. U.S. and China trade coronavirus accusations. Blame escalates. China and America's blame game. This wasn't a mere momentary blip. All the way until December 2020, Associated Press was writing up the lab leak as a conspiracy theory that survived online despite the facts. The enormous irony of the AP story about COVID conspiracy theories is the image that accompanies it. Wear a mask outside, the 1984-esque wall art reads. And there's no reason to wear a mask outside unless you're absolutely surrounded by people. The real facts aren't as hospitable to what the media was claiming in 2020. Further investigation into the lab leak in 2021 gave the idea respectability even the mainstream media couldn't ignore. They started to change their tune. Here's the New York Times. Then in 2023, Joe Biden's own Department of Energy said that the lab leak theory was the most likely explanation for COVID's origins. Right? So here you see side by side of the original reporting versus the newly indisputable facts from NPR. So what should have been investigated, what happened? The press had given social media platforms cover to censor the mere mention of the lab leak, and the media cheered along. Facebook doubles down on removing coronavirus conspiracy theories. So as a result of the media refusing to consider a politically inconvenient idea and their need to throttle its very mention, we may never definitively know what caused a pandemic that's killed millions and irrevocably changed the course of modern life. It may mean that some people get off scot-free for what they've done to play a role in that disaster. Hard to imagine that wasn't the goal all along. Rand Paul says email exchange between top Fauci aide and EcoHealth looks like a cover-up.
What's your revenue model? People come there to read long things, or like how much content and what kind? Like,
up in a situation where rather than build up the forest to be more fire resistant, you throw your hands up because the environmental folks are suing you. And so we're very much driven by the things that are happening out in the world, and we want to be responsive to those things in those conversations. But we also have a lot of really great feature pieces that are longer, I think 3,000, 5,000 words, that we're in the process of commissioning out. We've got a couple of great ones that have already gone up that look at those kind of broader macroeconomic and macro political sort of conversations.
All right. So the link to the website's in the chat. Recommend you check it out and give Drew a lot and rigorous. And I almost every time Drew puts a thread on Twitter with an analysis of something, my reaction is I want to go sit with the editor of the New York Times and Adam Schiff and say, read this and tell me what you think. Like, is Drew wrong? Is Drew made a factual error, or is his emphasis wrong? Because again, Drew is so meticulous. And if you're sick of my bleedings about dominant liberal media bias, don't take my word for it. Go read Drew's work. It's extraordinarily good. How is the press doing so far in terms of fairness regarding Donald Trump a week in?
Well, Mark, that is far too kind of you. I really appreciate you saying that.
It's all true. Mean it.
Early, I was quite surprised around the inauguration to see what I thought was pretty fair coverage. Right. One of the things I know you alluded to in your opening was that a lot of the things Donald Trump has done and pointed to and directionally indicated he wants to go toward are things that are broadly popular. Right. You mentioned the deportations. CBS did a poll a few months ago that found that 62% of Americans support mass deportations, right? Like he's directed his energies in a lot of ways at things that are popular. And around the inauguration, around the energy of it, the press seemed to actually, I thought, cover him pretty fairly. I was quite surprised. And then the rubber met the road a couple of hours later. Well, one of the things that really caught my eye was right before Trump's inauguration began, Joe Biden issued the last of his pardons. And it was interesting because I was waiting because I remembered the way the media talked about Donald Trump's pardons as he was leaving office, and the agitation and the scorn and the belief that what he was doing was wrong and illegitimate and bad and self-serving was everywhere when they talked about the pardons, right? The New York Times had a lead that said, that it indicated how far Donald Trump is willing to go to combat courts and juries and justice. And so I thought, oh man, when Joe Biden pardons his son and his brother and a bunch of other members of his family, when he offers mass pardon, 10-year, decades-long pardons on his way out the door, I thought surely the media will kick back and say, pardons. We were very upset about these pardons. It's an abuse of power to do it in this way. But no, the New York Times' lead-in instead said that Joe Biden was taking action to protect people from politically motivated trials from Donald Trump. And I thought, they're not exact cognates, but they're very, very close. And I think with even a small degree of integrity, it would have been far easier to cover those two things radically differently. And
Okay, let's get a quick look at Donald Trump's first week here from Fox.
Came out of the gates on warp speed times 10, bringing an intensity to the Oval Office I've never seen before of you. He had two objectives that I could tell: erase Joe Biden and channel Tom Brady.
Let's go.
Enough said. Everyone expecting him to start fast, but this fast, he came out firing and let the press witness the whole thing, signing executive order after executive order. Example, abolishing DEI policies in government. No men will be allowed to participate in women's sports. No longer, government will be allowed to stop free speech, reaching a ceasefire, an agreement in the Middle East, at least for now. Deportation flights have begun.
Okay, I don't want to get a copy strike for that music. So let's try to move past the music.
They have the tape of the shooting, and they don't even go up and you're talking about this. These people have served years of jail, and their lives have been ruined. And in many cases, listen to me for a second. Stop interrupting.
He didn't yell. He calmly cut him off. When a bishop stunningly turned a sacred service into the Rachel Maddow show and came out swinging with his entire family in attendance, instead of blasting the bishop, Trump kind of brushed it off.
What did you think of the service? What did you think? Did you like it? Did you find it exciting? Not too exciting, was it? I did think it was a good service, no. Thank you very much.
Thank you, press. Thank you, press.
They could do much better.
Kind of calm, right? And when his key advisor tried to diminish a $500 billion AI venture with data centers in Texas, talking about Elon Musk, he's letting the tech titans fight each other out, beat themselves up. DJT sat it out.
Mr. President, does it bother you that Elon Musk criticized a deal that you made publicly, that he said that he tweeted that?
No, it doesn't. He hates one of the people in the deal.
Have you spoken to him since then?
No, I've spoken to Elon, but I've spoken to all of them, actually. No, the people in the deal are very, very smart people. But Elon, one of the people he happens to hate, but I have certain hatreds of people, too.
So far, Donald Trump, the sequel, seems better than the first.
But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done.
And that's what he's done so far. And what we're all witnessing is winning. Joining us now, the host of Piers Morgan Uncensored, Piers Morgan. Uncensored, I should say. You've never been censored. But Piers, your thoughts about Trump, too. I'm very curious. You know him personally. And then you're seeing him again be president again. Have you seen a difference?
No question. And I'm so glad, Brian, you played that Rocky quote, the famous speech to his spoiled brat son, when he tells him to get a grip and tells him what winning is all about and how you do it. Because actually what Donald Trump has done is exemplify exactly what Rocky Balboa was saying. Life is not about what you hit. It's about how you can get hit, get back up, and keep moving forward. And what an example Trump has been. I mean, 2 years ago, he was dead and buried and politically gone. Now, he's the most powerful man in the world again, and he's hit the ground running so hard, I thought Usain Bolt had been running the schedule. It's unbelievable. And watching from London, as I am at the moment, I can only tell you the world reaction is kind of shock and awe in a good way, because we have a pretty limp Labour government over here. And obviously in America, you just had a very limp 4 years with Joe Biden and the Democrats. And suddenly you've got this surge of extraordinary energy. As somebody who I think, having spoken to a number of times in the last few months, I think he's feeling a sense of getting a second chance twice. Once in his own life, when he survived the assassination attempt, and once professionally to have another go at being president, because the last time, in his last year, it got derailed by the pandemic. And I think you're seeing Donald Trump right now at his absolute ferocious best.
And that is the perception. Not only is he winning at home, but then he goes into Davos and blisters them, lets them know what's the new. There's a new sheriff in town. You didn't like him before, but I'm not looking for your approval now. Get on board or be left behind. But in America, the Democrats, you wouldn't know this, cannot get their footing. AOC and the late night comics desperately trying to take a shot at Trump that people care about. Listen to what she just said. Watch.
He is much more normalized this time around than he was the first time. You're being ripped off. You're being ripped off, dude.
Dude, thanks for that. But that's what they fear. We're treating him like a human being that only a small portion of the media was.
You know what's fantastic about that, Brian? I mean, I think that if you're Donald Trump, you want AOC out there all day, every day, saying nonsense like that, because that can only help him. But secondly, how ironic that somebody from a party who for the last 4 years, have gone against normality, who've got increasingly insane, who've defied logic, common sense, science, biology, that they are the ones that are trying to accuse people of normalizing Trump. Let me tell you why Trump won AOC and why he won so big with so many different categories of people, black, white, Jew, Muslim, old, young, you name it, they came and voted for him. Why? Because as he said in his victory speech, he represents a core of common sense in a woke world of insanity that was presided over by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for 4 years. They encouraged, promoted, and propagated an absolutely farcical.
And Piers Morgan's traditionally been on the left, so it's somewhat surprising to see Piers so favorable towards Donald Trump.
There's the expression about the frog soup, about throwing it in versus not.
Yeah,
I kind of feel like there's kind of both strategies almost are happening within the Trump administration. Certainly there is the shotgun approach of a gajillion executive orders, just having all the different pronouncements that are not necessarily executive orders, but are kind of, hopes and decrees put forward as the kind of initial throwing the frog in the soup. But I also do get the sense that there is a bit of a longer game being played, especially, thinking about how potentially 26 is going to go and so on and so forth. But I don't necessarily hear a lot about that longer game. And so I'm wondering if you had some idea about what, we might be missing by focusing so much on just the kind of first 72 hours, all the noise that we might not be focusing on the boiling of the frog.
Great question, Jason. Drew.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple things come to mind. The first is that one of the things that I think has been really, really different between Trump in 2016 and Trump in 2024 is that he is far more cognizant about the way that what he says and does will be received by the media. And Mark, I think your point earlier about the shiny object that he points to, I think he's actually displayed that really, really well. And so my hope in that, in terms of where is he thinking more broadly and longer term, a lot of that is tied to American production and American innovation. I think there's been these dramatic day one executive orders. Some of them I think are very good. Some of them I guess I'm probably not as interested in. But a couple of them that I don't think in the amalgam of conversation that we're seeing about his radical changes and deportations, everything else. One of the things that he keeps pointing to is we're going to increase energy production. We need more energy. We need to win the races of the future. We need to be harnessing America in a way that we haven't before. And I think there's this kind of, this sense among a lot of people that we are simply not doing enough with the resources that we have here in the United States, whether that's on energy, whether that's the intellectual resources for things like AI, and that, he talked about the golden age of what America could look like. And I think, and I might be a little too optimistic, Mark, I know you called me out a minute ago, I'm an optimist through and through, with all the attendant baggage of that. But one of the things I think that he is building towards in a valuable way is unleashing some of that American innovation and unleashing some of that energy dominant potential. And I think that's probably getting lost a little bit in the discourse.
Yeah. That was great. Jason, Donald Trump contains multitudes. Okay. And so some of the things in terms of the long game, I don't think fit under the umbrella I'm about to offer you, but I think most of them do. And I think this is the biggest misconception about Trump. Okay. Here are the big things Trump is playing for between now and 29, not between now and 26, between now and 29. Okay. He wants the economy to grow at over 3%. And he thinks he can do that by controlling the border, which liberal experts and some independent experts would say controlling the border is actually going to hurt the economy. But he thinks controlling the border will help the economy. Control the border, economy grow at over 3%, maybe closer to 4%. Energy production, okay? Regulation reduction, tax cuts in place, and end the government fostering of woke culture. And then overseas, create a relationship with China and Russia where we're not wasting resources fighting them, whatever negotiations, whatever grand bargains have to be done, so that the American orientation of our GDP is not towards trying to checkmate China and Russia, neutralizing Iran, and giving Israel a peaceful neighborhood. Okay? He cares about many other things. But to me, based on covering him and knowing him, those are the big things. And you know what? Almost every one of those is exceedingly popular. even amongst people who don't like Donald Trump.
Really
Almost every one of those is exceedingly popular. And if he achieves those things, he'll go down in history as one of the greatest presidents of all time. And that's what he cares about. He wants to be known as a great president. Now, a lot of barriers to that, but I don't know how anybody could argue with those goals. There are people who don't want the border controlled, but most of the country does. Energy production's an interesting one, right? The left would tell you that people care a lot about global warming, and they do. But I think at the available evidence, they want cheap energy. It's a horrible thing about America. We think we have a birthright to cheap energy. Energy is so cheap in America. But people think it needs to stay cheap. And if you say to them, well, the only way to keep it cheap is to continue to burn fossil fuels, my sense is that most Americans, more than half, say, okay, that's okay. I'm sure we're not going to destroy the planet because there must be people paying attention to this. That's the only one. Everything else, neutralizing the competition with China and Russia, even if we have to make a dirty deal, making peace safe, the neighborhood safe for Israel, neutralizing Iran, these things are extremely popular. Reducing regulation, keeping taxes low. Again, you could say tax cuts for the wealthy, very unpopular, and they are. But he's not just cutting taxes for the wealthy. He's trying to cut taxes for people on Social Security, people who make tips, people who make overtime. So that's the long-term game. And I think part of the challenge is there's a lot going on now that doesn't relate to those issues, and there are things related to those issues where, particularly through the filter of the dominant media, you're not getting the right perception.
But I guess if those more popular things are longer term, and he is writing in with highest levels of popularity he's maybe ever had, is causing all this noise with the shorter term things that just happen to be a little bit more controversial and have less wide appeal. Is that maybe shooting himself in the foot a little bit before the longer term flowers have time to bloom?
No, because Trump does not care about short term pain. He's impervious to it. He does not care if he's criticized for attacking the Pope. He does not care if people don't like his FEMA posture. He just doesn't care. And he cares even less than last time, because if Maureen Dowd wrote a column this time saying his position on FEMA is outrageous, he just doesn't care. Just doesn't care. And Dick Cheney was the same way. I once asked Dick Cheney, when he was vice president, if he minded being criticized by the press. And he said he was once shaving, and he had Imus on in the background. And Imus was going on and on about what a windbag somebody was, what a horrible person, and how ridiculous that person was. And Cheney realized he didn't know who Imus was talking about, so he listened a little more closely, and it turned out Imus was talking about him. And Cheney just laughed uproariously telling this.
Lies on January 6th, really. That's what I've been kind of thinking about. What did they do wrong? And there's a lot of things that you could probably think about. And I met some people while I was there that are MAGA, and I've had a few interactions with those type of people. And there is a very small, from my interactions, percentage of MAGA people that are really spoiling for a fight all the time. As someone who is very Republican, very conservative, I do still see that. It's not the majority for sure. And as I've been thinking about it, then I think it's kind of what you're talking about with the media is they had to tie Trump to it. And it was like an obsession to them. While most normal people, it seemed like, thought that maybe there were some people that did bad stuff there, but it wasn't the whole of MAGA. And then you think of the speech that President Biden gave in Philadelphia, I think, where he was talking about, dark MAGA or whatever it was. And the question that I have is there going to be something else like that where over these next 4 years, they're going to be so obsessed that it seems like the whole country is just under a cloud for the entire 4 years?
Yeah. Aaron, it's a great question, and I'm going to let Drew answer it because he's expert. It's a great question. Yeah, it is.
That is a really good question.
Aaron, thank you. Go ahead, Drew.
Aaron, I think what it boils down to, kind of in both cases, is that the media and Democrats overplayed their hand and did so pretty considerably. I think you're right about the tying, but to me, it's less about trying to tie it to Trump, right? Because they were his supporters, and more about trying to make this thing that was bad.
This is a great point. January 6th was horrible. Donald Trump's role in trying to discredit the results of the 2020 election was a horrible thing. But then the Democrats overstated their case and they lost credibility.
To something that was the worst thing in the universe, right? There was I don't want to say she speaks for all Democrats or for all the media, but I think it was Sunny Hostin had said that it was worse than Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and this is January 6th, worse than Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and the Holocaust, right? Like, and I think while that is unspeakably dishonest, it captures a sort of sentiment that existed around January 6th, where it couldn't just be bad. It couldn't just be, offensive to the values that we hold dear as Americans. It couldn't just be this horrific thing that happened. It has to be the worst thing in the entire world, and anyone who doesn't see it as the worst thing in the entire world has to also be bad and evil and terrible. There's never any brokering of different perspectives on this. There's one absolute position. And any questions on it, anyone who would maybe come around after, myself included, to the role of the FBI in January 6th, or the lack of DC security from Mayor Bowser ahead of January 6th, anyone who was so much as raising those sort of questions was seen as they might as well have been in the Capitol with, stealing things and breaking windows themselves. And I just don't think that's the way normal people experience the world. And I think that there's, to your second question of, is there going to be this other dark cloud? I think the energy was that CNN did like a 7-part series about January 6th and the 1-year anniversary of it. And I can't imagine it was very well viewed because they kept trotting it out and kept doing it over and over again. I think people were just kind of sick of it and had been beaten to death. I suspect that there probably will be something like that with Donald Trump in his return. We had the Russian collusion narrative in his first term. I don't think we're going to go back to that, but I think you'll probably see something where the attempt to tar not just Trump, but anyone who supports him.
So every time I tried to read one of the major Russia collusion narratives, I would just get a headache. It just didn't cohere, right? No sane person could think there was a credible case that Russia hacked our 2016 election.
Probably coming down the pike, unfortunately.
Yeah. Aaron, thank you for the question. I will just say, as I've tried to say all week, because Drew made the case very well for why some people think January 6th, too much was made of it. I'll just say again, there are tens of millions of Americans who maybe don't think it's as bad as the Holocaust or 9/11, but they do consider it to be an extraordinary assault on our values. And what they don't like, maybe above anything else, is people on the right always looking to minimize it, always looking to say, well, what about the riots after George Floyd? What about the theory that the FBI played a bigger role? It's incumbent upon everybody who wants to make the case that too much was made of it, I believe, to understand why tens of millions don't think too much was made of it and are freaked out and angered by people who minimize it. Okay, that's the other side of what Drew said, which is absolutely right. And you can go back to what, to me, the great example I always use because it's illustrative. Nancy Pelosi said the Republican leadership couldn't pick the Republicans on the committee. Okay, it's never happened in modern history, at least. If the Republicans get to pick the Republicans, the Democrats get to pick. But the two people she vetoed really were, by I think objective standards, not the right people to pick. I would say they were inappropriate to pick. So on the one hand, you could say, how unfair. She picked Liz Cheney rather than the people Kevin McCarthy wanted to pick. On the other hand, I could say Kevin McCarthy made it very hard for Nancy Pelosi to follow precedent by picking people who, amongst other things, were potential witnesses in the investigation. You could argue it either way, but
Okay, my favorite person in the Trump administration is Stephen Miller. Here's a segment on Stephen Miller.
Help set up some of these raids and the new policy that's going to be dominating America for the next 4 years and hopefully picked up by the next president after that. Stephen Miller, your new title, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, Homeland Security Advisor. Welcome back to the White House. Your thoughts about what Elon Omar thinks about your policy.
Well, first of all, Brian, let me just say you and I have been friends for a long time now. It's great to be on air with you.
Thank you.
In my new role here at the White House, I want you to know that anytime you want to have me on to talk about what's happening in this country, this is where I want to be. So thank you for the invitation, and we're really excited about the next 30 days, 100 days, 4 years, and beyond. So, look, as you mentioned, President Trump has put in place a historic series of actions to secure the southern border and to restore American sovereignty. It's no surprise, of course, that congressional Democrats, as they always have, are complaining about the restoration of our national and territorial sovereignty. This is the most aggressive action any president has ever taken to secure our southern border. You've seen and you've shown the military planes that are taking off and that are landing illegal immigrants back into their home countries. We're also re-implementing, under President Trump's direction and leadership, Remain in Mexico. We're re-implementing Safe Third agreements, ending catch and release. And, of course, we are unleashing ICE to perform its mission all across the interior of the United States.
So that's happening in real time, in a matter of days and hours. Tom Homan told everyone this is going to happen. You know, I did notice this. You have Elon Omar, and, of course, the squad is always going to be the squad. But Democrats don't really know what to make of this, because if they criticize this, are they pro-international criminal? I mean, they're pulling out the worst of the worst, embedded in sanctuary cities from Boston to New York to Chicago. If they come out against you, they're coming out for international criminals.
Well, that's exactly right. Look, President Trump is liberating these communities. And look, I think all across the board, what you've seen, as people have said, look, President Trump did more in the first 3 or 4 days than most presidents have done in their entire administrations. Border security, immigration security, national defense, ending DEI, beginning the process of unleashing American energy, reforming the federal workforce, and tackling inflation, bringing down the cost of living, restoring government accountability, engaging in government transparency, ending the weaponization of government, ending federal censorship, ending transgender madness. So President Trump is implementing this historic slate of reforms all across the U.S. government with a simple but remarkable message. The American people are in control of their government again. They elected Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is implementing his mandate. And congressional Democrats, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to say because they're on the wrong side of 90-10 issues, Brian. All these issues are 90-10. They're in the 10%.
And 58% of the country is for mass deportations. You know, Stephen, people are trying to get a hold of the new administration, understand who comes in. They know you. I thought this tear out from Politico was pretty significant for people who don't. It's Stephen Miller's moment, they say. It is clear both by his actions and from conversations with people around Trump that Miller will be an even bigger power center this time around. Given Miller's hot shot status in the West Wing, Trump world dwellers in and outside the White House all but want to be in his good graces or at least avoid crossing him. Bring us behind the scenes with your expanded portfolio. What's it going to be like? What did you learn the first four that makes you more confident in this next four?
Well, that's very humbling, Brian, and I appreciate it. My job is simple. My job is to implement the orders and directions of the President of the United States, who's been elected by the whole American people. And to answer your question, and to serve him loyally, to serve him faithfully, and to make sure that the agenda that he campaigned on is implemented loyally and faithfully across the whole U.S. government. But to answer your question, look, he's assembled a team, and I include myself in this, who have learned how to use the levers of power within the departments and agencies to achieve righteous reform on behalf of the American people. So you mentioned, as an example, we talked about at the beginning of the segment, you have military aircraft carrying out repatriation flights, removal flights, for the first time in American history. I mean, just think about that. You've had presidents over generations, and never once have they used military aircraft to carry out these removals, which increases by 10-fold, 100-fold, our capacity to restore national sovereignty and to defend against invasion. President Trump was able to turn that on in 24 hours. Normally, Brian, a process like that would involve interagency planning meetings. You would have people who are the associate vice bureau director of XYZ, ABC. They'd be talking for weeks and months. Then you get lawyers involved. They'd have 100 different opinions, people who worked in the government for 30, 40 years, with throwing bureaucracy, throwing red tape, throwing in agency handbooks. President Trump gave the order, and the government snapped to and implemented in 24 hours. That's the team you're looking at now. That's the team that President Trump has assembled. So I will say to the recalcitrant bureaucrats that are out there, it's not up to you anymore. President Trump was elected. His agenda is going to be implemented. And I would say to the congressional Democrats who are on the wrong side of history, who are supporting these criminal aliens, it doesn't matter what you think, because this government, under President Trump's leadership, is going to get these criminal aliens out of the country. And he's going to use FBI, ATF, DEA, U.S. Marshals, Homeland Security investigations, Border Patrol, CBP, and ICE, and the military to liberate our cities and towns. And public safety will be restored, national security will thrive, and America will be happier and more prosperous than ever before. And, Brian, it's happening right now before our very eyes.
And it's we're still in the first week. It's hard to believe. Steve Miller, thanks so much. I hope to talk to you early and often. It's going to be an exciting time.
So Matt Ruby's a stand-up comic. He's politically towards the center. Got a good little essay here. 5 reasons there's no Joe Rogan of the left. Right. Number one, Joe Rogan's not primarily about politics. There isn't a Joe Rogan of the left because he's not for people interested in politics. The left would be wiser to go after people in non-political spaces, as Klein explains. Democrats think that the media is something that broadcasters and gatekeepers control. Media is something that you get booked on. Attention is something that you buy or you attract. Liberal Joe Rogan discourse drives me insane. You can't build Joe Rogan if you're a political person, because the whole point of Joe Rogan is that he's for people who are not interested in politics. Right, Democrats are obsessed with how the New York Times words its headlines about Donald Trump. But Democrats win people who read the New York Times headlines about Donald Trump. They lose people who don't read newspapers. Can't win them by being more and more political and be like, we're going to create Joe Rogan, but with left-wing politics. 2, Joe Rogan provides an antidote to loneliness, right? Podcasts, live streams provide an antidote to loneliness, right? It's a way of establishing a relationship with an online community because there's just so much content, right? Parasocial relationships are the name of the game. When people call for a Joe Rogan to the left, it seems they don't realize that one of the reasons that Joe Rogan is so powerful is that he is many of his listeners' best friend. People spend hours and hours a day with him. His show and his universe have become an on-demand loneliness-killing service. The power and value of that relationship is unmatched. Joe Rogan is fun. He's not a buzzkill. Big problem that Democrats face is nobody wants to hang out with a school mom, tattletale, nanny state HR rep. People always pick a party over a condemnation. One side wants to lecture people. The other side thinks that's retarded. Building an audience takes time. Reason number 4, Joe Rogan started his podcast in 2009. He was on cam streams with me, not on my show, but we were both on cam streams and us streams in 2007. And no one likes people who hate them. Men think you hate them, Democrats. All they ever hear the left talk about are how masculinity is toxic. It's not a great invitation. We've lived for decades in a culture that has normalized the denigration of traditional masculinity. Belittling men is mainstream. Men have spent the past several decades being told they benefit from male supremacy, particularly white male supremacy, even as they watch their opportunities, their educational opportunities, their professional opportunities, their wages decline, all things going down. They are chided for their toxic masculinity, told to make space for women, all while being asked to apologize simply for being male. Right? Joe Rogan speaks to men in a way that embraces men. Can anyone on the left come out and say they think masculinity is great and that dudes who like stuff that dudes like, such as sports cars, gadgets, that's cool? Lefties exist in a realm of moral superiority and lecturing the rest of us. It's an inherent part of leftism that they are more moral than we are, and they need to educate us. Okay, what other brilliant things? Oh, Julie Hartman is moving on. So Dennis Prager had a big crashing fall. He got out of the bath in early November, around November 12, and he was walking over to the sink for a shave, and he slipped on the fall and cracked his neck, and he's been a paraplegic ever since. He can't even speak, can't articulate words, and he's 79 years of age. It seems unlikely that he'll ever return to broadcasting. So Julie Hartman is giving up her association with Prager and her weekly Dennis and Julie shows because Dennis can no longer speak, let alone broadcast. And she is moving on to take a job in the Trump administration.
Julie Hartman Live. It is Thursday, January 23rd, 2025. I'm Julie Hartman, and it is great, as always, to be with you. I am so sorry that I haven't been with you for about a week and a half now, though once you hear why, I have no doubt that you will understand. As many of you know, there were some terrible wildfires here in Los Angeles that affected some members of this team, especially our dear Sean McConnell. Sean lost his home in the Altadena fire, and he has since been living in an Airbnb. So we've had some production disruption because of that. And also, I was affected in part by the Palisades fire because I grew up in Pacific Palisades, and my whole community has been destroyed. Literally, through an act of God, a miracle, my home was spared. It was one of a few that was spared on my street. We thought that it was totally over. I mean, when we saw the videos of the Palisades fire sweeping through our neighborhood, burning down Pali High, burning down the elementary school that I went to for kindergarten, burning down the church that I was at on Christmas Eve, burning down many of the homes on my street, we thought that our house was done for. But thankfully, it did survive. But that's just to say that it has been a particularly crazy past few weeks. And then on top of that, I got the norovirus, which, by the way, may I just say, if you could at all control it, don't get that. It is not exactly fun. I actually got the norovirus my freshman year of college in February of my freshman year, and I went to the student health center, and I was hooked up with an IV, getting IV fluids, and I had my friends come and visit me. So I was lying there like a vegetable. So it wasn't my first rodeo, but that's just to say I'm so sorry that we've had a little bit of a hiatus from the show. And to further segue into something, speaking of a hiatus, I am announcing today that this is actually my last show of Timeless. It's very bittersweet. I am filled with all sorts of emotions right now, more than you could possibly imagine. But I will be moving on from my on-air work here at the Salem Media Group, and I will actually be moving to Washington, D.C. next week to work for the Trump administration. So you can see why it's bitter and it's sweet. As I'll talk about more in this show, I have loved my time here. I have been unimaginably grateful for the time that I have spent being with all of you, and all of the challenges that have come with this job, all of the triumphs, all of the things that I have learned. The opportunity to get to know you and be a small part of your life has been really one of the greatest honors of my life. But I'm also so excited to move on to this next chapter. I didn't expect it. You know, Trump was just elected 2 months ago. And certainly in those 2 months, in addition to the fires, there's been a lot that's happened. As we know, our dear Dennis took a catastrophic fall and has since been in the hospital. But I can say I surely didn't anticipate that it would shake out this way. It calls to mind the words of Charles Dickens. It is the best of times and it is the worst of times. But as Trump indicated in his inaugural address, I really think that this is such a moment of opportunity in our country. We have someone who is very competent coming back into power. There seems to be a reinvigoration of patriotism and a desire to shed our country of some of these terrible things that have infiltrated our daily life, DEI, a border that is out of control, wars erupting, this crazy race and gender ideology that has permeated schools and workplaces. I really think people are so excited to let that go and go into a new golden age of America. So it is my great, great hope that through my work with the Trump administration, I will contribute in any way I can to help make that possible for the American people. So to be more specific about my role, I'm going to be the senior advisor for the Office of Communications in the Department of Education. So that's really ground zero as far as many of the endeavors that the Trump administration is pushing forth. I think a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't have voted for Trump decided to vote for him in this past election, in large part because of issues pertaining to education. I think a lot of people want to see DEI, DIE. They want to see transgender individuals not be in bathrooms of the opposite sex or in sports of the opposite sex. They want to see merit restored to our classrooms. They want to reverse the dismal trends of education. I mean, I was looking the other day at the Nation's report card, and about 31% of eighth graders, only 31%, are proficient in reading at their grade levels.
All right. Comedy Cellar USA is a Jewish-owned comedy club in New York City. They've got Eli Lake here, who's starting up a new podcast on a history of populism in the United States.
Things. And in some ways, I think that the fact that our system can accommodate populists is one of the reasons why a republic founded in revolution has managed to pretty much survive. There's civil wars, there's a lot of catastrophes, there's political assassinations, there's all kinds of bad things, but the system has survived for almost 250 years because we can accommodate Trump-like, Andrew Jackson-like figures.
You give us another 250, Eli?
I would love it.
Now, so is populism, is it a medicine that we need to take every so often, and then it makes some important points or kind of like resets the board a little bit, and then some of the ideas get integrated by one part of the other party or the other? Is there a salutary effect?
I think that medicine is a great way to look at it because too much medicine is poison. So the toxicity is determined by the dose. And in this respect, too much populism is really bad. For one, you could argue that populism is so prone to conspiracy theory. Because what it says is that there's faceless there's a faceless elite, and sometimes it's the banks, sometimes it's the media, sometimes it's the deep state, but it's always like this group that really pulls the strings of power and is screwing the little guy. So that's the conceit of all of the populist movements. Some have been good, some have been terrible, and we're all Jews here, I think.
Except for Tiana and Mike, but they're
okay. But my thing is that if you what's the original conspiracy theory? It's anti-Semitism. So there's a real danger there. And that's not to say that all American populist movements have been anti-Semitic. That's certainly not true. But some of them have been, and some of these populist figures like Father Coughlin. So there's a danger in all that.
Okay, so coming up is the segment that stimulated tonight's show and my opening sermon.
Can I jump from that to get everybody's take yours? I watched Trump's inaugural address.
Yeah.
And I did not like it at all.
Huh.
I didn't like the vibe, but there was, I'm always surprised to hear myself say things like this. But when he said, from now on, there are only 2 genders in the United States of America. And I said to myself, well, yeah, of course, I lean in that direction. But I just had the very distinct feeling he was making his point in a way which was really designed to activate people's bigotry. So many of us by now have in our families or our friends' families or third degree separation for sure, people who are dealing with this very, very difficult issue of their kids who are experiencing whatever mental condition it is where they're struggling with their genders. And people are, their children, cutting off their breasts, cutting off their genitals. They're not faking it, right? When you cut off your own breasts, you are.
Okay, so for this guy, just admitting that that our sex is in our hormones, in our chromosomes, and that there's only male or female, just noting this aspect of reality that is either or, either you're male or you're female, except for very few exceptions, that this dominance of a simple category of male versus female, he finds that hateful. But the categories of day and night are not nullified in their usefulness because sometimes there's twilight or early morning where you're kind of between darkness and light. So just because there's a speed limit of 55 miles an hour and someone who's driving 56 miles an hour could theoretically get a ticket does not invalidate the usefulness of having a speed limit at 55 miles an hour. Anytime you make a definition or a law, there's going to be stuff on the margins. Right. The overwhelming reality of life is that people are born either with male chromosomes or female chromosomes. And simply noting that that part of reality is not hateful. And Judaism in particular, and this guy who's speaking is Jewish, is all about this nature of life that is frequently either or. It's kosher or it's not kosher. It's male or it's female. It's adult or it's a child. And these kind of distinctions all through life are not invalidated because there are a tiny number of instances where the distinction is not clear. So I found this revelatory of a sick type of thinking.
Totally in the throes of some sort of condition. And I don't have resentment towards those people, nor do I have resentment for their struggle to try to have society treat them in a way that gives them opportunity and allows them to have fulfilling lives. Yes, they shouldn't be competing in sports like that. Yes, we have to worry about prison rapes. Yes, everything gets out of control. But I know very well that the people who were cheering, I was in a hotel, a lot of people, that was the biggest applause line of all. It turned me off. I'm like, why couldn't you say something?
You're obviously not a traditional Jew. Recognizing that there are two sexes, male and female, is not hateful.
Mind about these people. At the same time, you're explaining to.
Why should you mention a tiny number of people who are overwhelmingly suffering from mental illness? Why, in your inaugural address, do you pander to them?
The country that we can't accommodate it quite to the extent that we have been, but we have no ill feelings toward them. And just to say one more thing.
Okay, I can't take any more of that. So David gave us this link.
In the sense that October 7th just happened, the country is in shock and rage, and they don't want to allow food and electricity. They decided that they wanted to do this. I think it was a poor decision in the sense that I don't think it was sustainable. But on the other hand, this is like...
I don't know. It makes sense to me. Deny food, deny water, deny electricity, deny everything to Gaza until the hostages are returned. That kind of approach makes sense to me. I think that's a pretty normal, healthy approach when one side takes hundreds of your people hostage, then deny water, food, medicine, everything, electricity to the side that's taken your people hostage. I'm fully on board with Israel denying food, water, electricity to Gaza until Gaza returns the hostages.
Like a tactic that one would say, okay, fine, no food until you give us back our hostages. I don't think that was going to work. I think it's completely understandable in those first 2 weeks to say that we're going to close our border until we get our people back.
What's relevant is the intent. It corresponds to this period of blocking all food from coming in. They're also bombing Gaza at the same time and killing more civilians than have died in any month of bombing in the 21st century.
In history, right, civilians always share the fate of their state, right? Citizens share the fate of their nation state, and Gaza is effectively de facto a nation state, and Gaza effectively invaded Israel, and Gaza, like all other invaders, will have to pay the price.
Century, and it shows murderous intention. This is how we operate in the law. We look at intention, even if the intention doesn't lead to tangible consequences.
The UN agency that measures famine said there hasn't been a famine.
You're jumping from one issue to another. I'm talking about murderous intentions that we have evidence of in the context of this starvation strategy.
Matthew, yes, after you are attacked in a
right, when one side has murderous intentions, invades Israel, and slaughters as many people as they can, it doesn't surprise me that Israel would have some murderous intentions in retaliation for that. And I don't think that retaliation and vengeance are sick. I don't think they're bad, right? All punishments contain a healthy element of vengeance.
Vicious and horrible way.
Yeah,
the
you
country
that
you attacked is going to have murderous intentions against the people that just attacked you. Why is that like a difficult concept?
Hello, everybody. This is Glenn Loury. You've tuned into The Glenn Show. I'm with John McWhorter, my regular conversation partner every other week. We talk at The Glenn Show. He's a professor at Columbia University. His role in peer reviewing an important study by an organization called Air Wars, which has assessed the extent of civilian casualties in aerial conflict throughout the Middle East, but especially in Gaza in the first month of the war, he has brought to our attention. We decided it would be good to have a spirited discussion about that here. Let me just say that Air Wars is a London-based non-for-profit company that tracks and archives the international air war against Islamic State and other groups. And
absolutely, Eli wouldn't either. So we're both gentlemen above polemics. In terms of the study, what it reveals is shocking, and what it reveals is corroborative of what we know from other sources, of a convergence of evidence about the nature of the bombing campaign in October 2023. This was the bloodiest bombing campaign for a month of bombing in the 21st century by far, shattering records of women killed, children killed, and civilians killed in the 21st century. Obviously, you can find worse cases in the 20th without much difficulty, but the 21st century. In terms of some comparisons, the number of women killed in this 25-day period of bombing by Israel was nearly 7 times as great as the number of women killed by the United States in Raqqa and Mosul combined. The entire wars, we're talking about well over a year of bombardment. The number of children killed is approximately equal to the number of children killed by all foreign actors. So we're excluding Assad, but we're talking about Russia, United States, foreign terrorist groups, and so on, in the bloodiest year of the Syrian civil war for children. And another important element of this is that the overwhelming majority of deaths are caused by bombing non-militarized homes. So the one thing the Israelis like to say, and they're correct, is that Hamas embeds among civilian groups insofar as they militarize civilian infrastructure, and this creates risks to civilians, right? But in October 2023, the overwhelming majority of civilian casualties, over 90% of the women and children killed, were killed by bombing non-militarized homes. And what Israel appears to have been doing, and we know this from other reporting in The Guardian and 972 magazine, is enacting a program called Where's Daddy, where if one Hamasnik, a guy who was in Hamas or was demobilized for whatever reason, he went home to sleep, right? Israel would do an AI program with the name Where's Daddy. It would trigger a bombing. and they would bomb the home, and entire multi-generational families would be liquidated. This happened over and over again. On average, to cite one of the shocking statistics, which again attests to this program, the Where's Daddy program, when one civilian was killed, on average, 14 members of his family were killed with him in October 2023. Moreover, I think it's even dubious that, and the Air Wars report supports this, and also the New York Times report supports this, how many of these people were actually Hamasniks that they were targeting, right? I think their AI program was very glib. I think they were going very fast. They wanted to respond in a big way to October 7th. And the final result was reckless indifference to civilian life, and also reckless targeting practices insofar as they weren't even sure these people were in Hamas, that they were bombing to death in their homes with their families. And in the final analysis, this is my interpretation, not Air Wars, the bombing was of such a lethal character, again, shattering all 21st century records for civilians killed, women killed, children killed, that this actually amounted to murder under the laws of war. And what I mean by that is not necessarily, although I think this is true, frankly, not necessarily that Israel wanted to kill civilians, that there was a goal to kill civilians for punitive reasons or whatever in October 2023, but that they were showing what is called reckless disregard for civilian life. So they were just glibly liquidating these multi-generational families, bombing these homes with weak evidence of combatant status for this one person. And this amounts, even if you don't want to kill civilians, under the laws of war, if you show reckless disregard, it's not that you're not trying enough, you're just barely trying at all, this amounts to murder under the laws of war. And this is a serious disgrace for the Western world and for Western intellectuals. Present company excluded in terms of Glenn, at least. I don't know your views, John, and I know, so I guess included for you, Eli, that we would condone this. And I think, again, we'll talk about this more, but there's all kinds of other evidence in addition to this study in terms of Israeli public opinion, in terms of murderous intentions regarding starvation in the early parts of the war by Israeli leadership that corroborates a policy of effectively murder in at least the early.
So you're asking a lot when you're asking a country to act against its own interests. It was obviously in Israel's interest from day one to drive out as many Palestinians and Muslims and Arabs from Israel as possible. In the creation of the founding state of Israel, right, there was a systematic program to drive out Arabs from what was going to become the Jewish state. And the only thing that prevented that from happening was international media attention, particularly to Arabs around Bethlehem. So if the founders of Israel had had their way, there wouldn't have been any Arabs in the Jewish state of Israel. Then, after Israel won its stunning victories in 1967, right, it suddenly found itself in charge of about 2 million Arabs, who are now about 7 million, in the West Bank and Gaza. And it's obviously in the Jewish state of Israel's interest to drive Arabs out of the West Bank and to drive Arabs out of Gaza, to just get rid of them any way that they can. And on both sides, they wish that the other side would disappear. I understand that Arabs in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, in Egypt, in Gaza and the West Bank, they wish the Jews in the Jewish state would disappear. And most Jews in the Jewish state wish that the Arabs in Gaza and the Arabs in the West Bank would disappear. And so you're asking Israel to behave, right, very gently towards people that Israel wants to be rid of. And just as you would probably want to ask the Palestinians to be gentle with the Jews in the Jewish state. But each side wants the other side gone from that particular area of the world. They are both massively incentivized to rid the opposing side, because the opposing side is an excruciating threat.
Part of the war. I don't think we can say that for the war as a whole.
Well, if I could respond.
Of course, I was going to try to fashion a question to invite you to respond, but
you want to?
Okay. What else do I have lined up here? All right, this is Ken Brown, a.k.a. Deep Left Jokel, who used to refuse to talk to anyone, not only anyone who was Jewish, but anyone who would platform Jews. So that was his stated policy back in 2018. He now seems to have left that behind.
In that he, at one point in the past, was writing for American Renaissance, associated with Jared Taylor. He defended the hereditarian position. He's not himself a scientist, but he found an interest in these topics. And then
so this is Ken Brown talking with Ian Jobling.
A number of years later, now he has rebuked that former position. He's come out against it. And, again, still neither of us are professional geneticists here, so we are not experts in the field that you should take us as the word of God or the word of the experts. But, he follows people now like Sasha.
So my main takeaway from this is it's very dangerous to employ people who are mentally ill, as Ian Jobling.
Gusev, who've come out pretty strongly and has had some interesting articles on that. So I just wanted to ask you, before we get into maybe the details of the arguments of why you changed that position from a logical standpoint, I guess tell me a little bit about personally what that was like. And again, we're talking about 2010, which for a lot of people in the fast-paced world we live in is like ancient history. But can you take us back to that time? What were you thinking? What in your life? What were sort of the motivations that you think in terms of your personality or your life experience? What sort of drew you into that? And then when did that begin to change?
Right. So we have to go back even further than 2010, all the way back to 2000. At which point I was a PhD student in comparative literature and was not happy. In that position, mostly because I had a very scientific outlook, and that contrasted markedly with the outlook of most of the people around me, who were postmodernists, Foucauldians, who thought that science didn't tell anyone about the truth. It was always a way of controlling people, right? And so I was unhappy for that reason. I also had rather serious mental health problems, right? And I was later diagnosed as schizotypal, which is sort of a mild form of schizophrenia. And for these reasons was not really able to participate in a professional community as an adult, right? And I think what happened to me is what happened to a lot of young people and young men back then who were having trouble adjusting to the world, is that, we got into, Charles Murray and decided, the reason I'm having all these troubles is that I'm a brave truth teller and all the people around me are deluded. And so I, embraced that kind of identity very enthusiastically and read the bell curve and want to talk about it with everyone, and eventually started writing. Well, I got involved in the, before the American Renaissance website, we had the listservs. I don't know if you know what a listserv is. There's just email groups that exchange information, and I got heavily involved in that. And Jared Taylor asked me to write for the magazine, and I did. And in the last part of 2002, he hired me, and so I moved down to Oakton, Virginia, and started working for American Renaissance. And I knew nothing about web design, and he said, "Well, we need to upgrade our website," which was very much Web 1.0, or more like actually Web 0.0. And I said, "Hey, there's this thing called movable type where we can publish articles and people can comment on them and we can moderate them." And so I learned about that, and I reworked the whole American Renaissance website, and so it was we could post news articles and people could discuss them, and that was extremely popular. There were a lot of very, very popular race realist or racist, I would say now, white nationalist websites, including ours and Stormfront and various others. We were a bit different from Stormfront in that we just didn't allow anyone to talk about Jews, right? We just didn't want to hear about that. From our perspective, we were going to say Jews were white people, and that suppression of commentary on that subject never ceased to dog us, and we were often ridiculed for it. But I think we did attract a different type of reader. A lot of them were Jewish, so eventually that Jewish issue became the major reason why I left American Renaissance, because I was always appalled by neo-Nazis. I was always appalled by Holocaust deniers. I considered myself a reasonable person, and I did not consider Holocaust denial to be a reasonable belief. And I and a number of other subscribers wanted Jerry Taylor to address this issue. And so they sent him a letter in which I participated anonymously, and he got really mad about the letter. And so it was in that context that I ended up leaving American Renaissance. And I kind of quit. I was kind of fired, And after that, I ran a couple of my own websites, trying to present a sort of what I consider a more rational view of race without the Holocaust denial and all that stuff. And eventually, so we're at the year 2006 here now when I started those websites, and I did that for about 4 years, and eventually just kind of got sick of it, which was kind of a sign that my mental health problems were ebbing, because I was 40 years old then, and your brain chemistry starts to change, and I just decided that I didn't want to do this stuff anymore, and so I stopped doing it, and I didn't think about race for a while, and thought about it for a couple of years, and after a couple of years, I thought, wow, a lot of the stuff I was saying back then wasn't really true, and I also wanted to get a job, and my name was very associated with the stuff. I thought it might be an impediment. And so I did an interview with the Southern Poverty Law Center in which I discussed a lot of the stuff I've been talking with you about. And then I didn't think about race until really, I guess, last year. And I had all these writing projects, but I really couldn't put anything together. I couldn't figure out who I was. And finally this year, I sort of, I discovered Substack, and I've been able to put together some new articles. And the first article I wrote was again about my view of race, and I started to read up about it. And I read a lot of the critics of race realism, which I really hadn't done much of before, including James Flynn, who wrote a book called "What is Intelligence?" against the strong hereditary position on IQ. And then I started reading about contemporary population genetics, starting to try to understand it. And I now see that the old ideas that I was working with about heritability and what was innate and what was environmental is completely obsolete. And there's a new way of studying these things that has resulted from the mapping of the genome, where people associate genetic variances with phenotypic traits. And those have universally found the heritability of IQ, that is the extent to which it's determined by your genotype, to be extremely low. They don't quite know how low yet. But I hope you'll put in a link to the Sasha Gusev article called "No Intelligence is Not Like Height," which is why it was about how contemporary population genetics has discovered that height really is a strongly heritable trait that's heavily determined by our genotype, but intelligence really isn't. The contemporary heritability estimate for intelligence is 2 to 5%, right? From contemporary population genetics.
He's trying to tell us that the current thinking is that intelligence is only 2 to 5% heritable. Right? Just absolute nonsense. Right? Think about smart parents. Their children tend to be smart, just as athletic parents tend to have athletic kids. Musically gifted parents tend to have musically gifted children. Good-looking parents tend to have good-looking children. Right? There's no evidence that intelligence is only 2% genetic. Right? All such traits are approximately 50% genetic to perhaps 80% genetic. Right? We have more studies that validate the predictive power and explanatory power of IQ than any other area in social science. And we know that traits such as intelligence have a substantial genetic component, and the idea that it's just 2%. All right, he hated being on the margins. Right, he was completely isolated from his family, and he was kind of an antisocial personality, and he wanted to get a job. He wanted to get back into polite society, and so he just makes up reasons for why he needs to change his mind on controversial topics.
Interested in, you say that you kind of put your name out there and you felt that might have hurt some employment aspects. You also had this leftist family. Could you describe kind of what that was? Were your family aware of your views? How did that affect you?
Oh, yeah, they were definitely aware of my views. I would not stop talking about my views. And it made for some pretty tense times with my whole family. It's to the credit of my mother and father that they maintained a relationship with me, because I could very well have abandoned them. But they always, my mother especially, always listened to me and presented another side and supported me, and so I did maintain those relationships. The relationships with some of my uncles and cousins kind of ended at that point. But there were a lot of there was a lot of conflict because.
Yeah, parents have more invested in their kids, so they're going to be much less likely to cut off contact than cousins and uncles who are not nearly as invested in you. And if they find your behavior and your views repugnant, right, they're not going to have nearly as much patience and love for you as your parents.
I was always talking about this stuff, but we did manage to iron things over, I guess, smooth things over.
Do you feel like, I would use kind of COVID as an example of something where there was a very harsh polarization. Some people were saying, the vaccine it's a Bill Gates genocide plan to kill everybody, and other people were saying, well, if you don't take the vaccine, you're basically inadvertently killing people who are, compromised immune systems. And so on both sides, there was this very, tense mood. And I noticed that within families, people wouldn't come to Thanksgiving, or people would sort of split apart. And even years later, where I think that issue is less contentious, or people just don't care so much about COVID vaccines because it's not as relevant, that pain and that separation which occurred, even though the particular issue that ignited it is gone or not as prevalent, the separation remains, that families remain split apart. And do you feel like you were successfully able to overcome that, or is there still lingering effects?
So I don't see most of my family, and that is partly due to the pain of that conflict. But it's partly just selfishness on my part. There's a lot of people in my family that I never really got along with. I never really enjoyed their company, they have a lot of problems, and I'm really glad I'm not involved in those. So it's actually kind of selfish on my part. And unlike a lot of people, I do not idealize families. I think a lot of people.
So when you're young and you have problems with family, you imagine that in the world out there, you're going to be able to connect with just your friends, and you're going to be able to build these great relationships that are not nearly as much hassle as relationships with your family and extended family. But then as you grow older, you are more likely to be humbled by life and to recognize that with family and extended family, you can often just return after not seeing each other for 14 years. I didn't see my brother for 14 years in real life, and we were just right back there. We didn't need to reestablish anything. Friendships require frequent maintenance, but with family and even extended family, you can just go right back to where you were before. So it's a lot easier to have relationships with people with whom you're genetically related. And as this guy gets older, I think he'll come around to that perspective, I would hope. Right, Kip says, the problem with Jews is primarily psychological. They think we're special, we are ancient, we are universal. Okay, Kip, name me one people that does not think it's special. I'm waiting. Name me one people that does not think it's special. Name me one people that does not think it's ancient. Name me one people that does not think it has a universal significance. Right, name me one. Problem with Jews is they think we're oppressed. Okay, Kip, name me one group that does not feel oppressed. Name me one group that does not feel oppressed. So all the reasons that you don't like Jews, they're common with all of humanity. Then comes shame, inferiority, anger, and ethno-narcissism. Okay, name me one group that is not filled with all of these qualities. Right, name me a people that is not troubled by shame. Name me a people that's not troubled by feelings of inferiority. Name me a single people that's not troubled by feelings of anger. But never an ounce of self-examination. Have you ever read the Bible, Kip? Right? The Hebrew Bible is the most self-critical Bible of any of the world's major religions. The idea that Jews completely lack self-examination, not 1 ounce of self-examination. Right. That's why Jews gave the world psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, because Jews are just incapable of self-examination. That's why we have the concept of Heshbon HaNefesh, examining the soul. Have you ever read the Psalms, Ecclesiastes, the Jewish prophets? No. So I think when it comes to 1 ounce, it's not 1 ounce to what you're arguing. What happened in those 109 countries? Yeah, in different countries, a tiny people were kicked out, were expelled. And this is what happens in the world. The strong take what they want, and the weak endure what they must. And Jews have frequently been a tiny, weak minority. And as with other tiny, weak minorities, they had to endure what they endured. There is no self-correcting mechanism to stop the rabble-rousing impulse. So you have some delusion that most Jews are rabble-rousers, but most Jews, like most non-Jews, are primarily interested in their family, in making a living, in getting by, in getting educated, in moving along with their profession. Most Jews are not out there trying to change society. Right? Only a tiny percentage of Jews are rabble-rousers or activists. So have you said anything about Jews that would not be equally true of any other people? Theodor Herzl in The Jewish State blamed mediocre intellects for causing problems in their host countries. Even he glosses over the true scope of host countries being corrupted. So you must think Gentiles are the most pathetic people in the world if 0.1% of their population is Jewish and that 0.1% somehow corrupts them. So you have absolute contempt for non-Jews. I don't share your level of contempt. From your perspective, if some crafty Jew tells a non-Jew, hey, go suck off a dog, then that poor Gentile, he's just helpless. He must go do what the crafty Jew tells him. He's just absolutely helpless. So in your imagination, non-Jews got along great until Jews entered their midst. It was just heaven on earth until the Jew came along. So much easier to blame your problems on outgroups, on other people, right? The problems of black people are primarily the fault of black people. The problem of Jews are primarily the fault of Jews. Problems of Anglos are primarily the fault of Anglos. The problems of Germans are primarily the fault of Germans. Right? Each people is its own primary cause of trouble in the world. Oh, unfortunately, my people come from high trust societies. And so you're just absolutely helpless in the face of some crafty Jew. Just helpless. You think your own people are the most pathetic living creature, right? People did not evolve to be gullible, right? Your people would not be here if they were nearly as gullible as you believe them to be. I mean, I don't know why you have so much hatred and contempt for your own people. I don't know why you think they're the most pathetic living creatures on the face of the earth. I mean, I certainly don't view non-Jews that way, but you do. I think that's sad to be so filled with loathing and contempt and hatred for your own people. Been watching Netflix 2-part series on Jerry Springer. Fights, camera, action.
I remember one night a woman called the show because she wanted to tell her dad to stop ordering her at the website that she's a hooker on because they'd send her. And she'd have to do the job. This had been going on since she was like 16, right? And I'm like, I'm not going to get this fucking story. Like, the dad's not going to come, right? And he came. And I was like dumbfounded. We had them under aliases in different hotels, and they didn't know where each other were. And I went over to her hotel first, just to see how she was doing. And I knocked on the door, and her dad opened the door in a towel. And she came to the door, and You could tell that she was embarrassed. They just got done, having sex. It was like putting 2 barrels of a shotgun to my head and pulling the fucking trigger. That's something that I don't think I need to contribute to.
And that's when he left the Jerry Springer show. So, yeah, it must have taken quite the toll. Luke, you should really put YouTube Norm Macdonald prison story. Okay, I love Norm Macdonald. So let's check out Norm Macdonald prison story.
Rocco explained the difference between the outside and the inside to me. On the outside, a man rises to power using his ambition and cunning. On the inside, you make your way up the ropes one way and one way only, by the number of fellows you can rape. That's why, within the jail, Rocco's name was spoken in hushed tones. He was a raper's raper. He was staying right here in prison, he told me, because inside he had the necessary skills to...
Oh, man, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get a copyright strike for this story. But, yeah, this comes from his book. It's the audio portion of his book. That's not going to fly, but here, let's try.
You want to hear
else.
A joke? Yeah, of course. Well, a frog. You know how you talk about outlandish. How about this? A frog goes into a bank to get a loan. Imagine. So the frog goes up to the lady, and she has a little name tag on, as they do. It says Whack. So her name is Mrs. Whack. Mm-hmm. So, can I get a loan? Well, I don't know. You're a frog. Well, I want a loan. Well, what's your name? Kermit. You're not Kermit the Frog. No. I was named after him. The name's Kermit Jagger. My father's Mick Jagger, and my mother's a frog. He fucked a frog. and I'm his offspring. You see? Well, anyways, I want a loan for a lily pad. Well, you can't. I don't know if you can have one. Do you have any collateral? Well, I have this. The frog pulls out a little shiny pink elephant, and a little shiny pink elephant. This is my collateral. So Mrs. Whack looks at it, and her name's Patty. I don't think this is much collateral, but I'll talk to the bank manager about it, There's a frog out there, Kermit Jagger, gave me this damn thing. Did you have any idea what this is? The bank manager says, let me see now. What is this? This is a knick-knack, Patty Whack. Give the frog a loan. His old man's a rolling stone.
Knick-knack, Patty Whack. Give that frog a loan. His old man's a rolling stone. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.